Vale, para organizar. Muy bien, gracias.
Great, thank you so much. So, I was previously discussing a little bit about our Colombian case, about three main elements that have been major for us in most recent years to advance a curriculum transformation. The first aspect that we are working from is how Colombia is moving towards integration and articulation processes in their curriculums. The first aspect that we need to consider when discussing this is to understand the student as a whole, as a human being, as a subject of rights. And when we talk about the student, we know that we have been having a discussion around the student for over the past 15 years on how can we acknowledge children as a subject of rights. And at first sight, it might not be directly related to education, but we say that it's fundamental for the curriculums and the educational processes that we develop. Because when we refer to the child as a subject of right, we can see the child as an active subject that is engaged, that has its own thoughts, that might distance him or herself from certain circumstances. And we need to understand that to formulate our curriculums. Our previous experiences that we had rigid curriculums and that they were homogeneous for the total of the population. And what we were discussing is that if we want a real transformation of the curriculum, we need to truly understand how teachers and parents, how they think about their children. And this is a discussion that was not very familiar for the teachers. So we have been working for a number of years in that process. Right now, I'm Deputy Minister of Education, but before this, I had the opportunity to work in the guiding and supporting policy making of early childhood. And then is when it was so important, it was evident that we needed to understand the importance of identifying children as subjects of rights. And we needed to analyze the child as an individual, that they have their speed of development, their own learning speeds, and that makes a difference in understanding why the curriculum needs to be flexible and open and needs to include other contexts of the environment of the children for it to be relevant. Another aspect that we needed to take into consideration is that if our educational process was not child-centered, then our curriculum is going to be limited only to contents. So we can see in some regions here in Colombia where we have strict time schedules, or what we have here is different courses divided by subjects. Here in Colombia, we don't have standardized universal curriculum. Each institution has its own curriculum autonomy, but we do have 9 subjects or mandatory courses that need to be taken by the students. This allows teachers to innovate, to leverage that autonomy, to make different proposals for their contents and to develop different ways of working inside the classrooms. Unfortunately, how that has translated into the reality is that we've seen fragmented contents, or we don't have defined learning processes, or we don't have clear learning outcomes, or a breadth of skills included in the curriculums. So what we have been saying is that we need that the conversation and the practice in education is child-centered more than focusing on the contents either of the different disciplines or the different knowledge. And something else that is very important to consider in understanding this educational reform into having more flexible curriculums is the context of a country as Colombia. The poverty levels that we have here in Colombia, we can say that we have bridged some gaps in terms of poverty and that we have great advance in the latest in the last decade. We know that Colombia is a country that faces the most inequality in South America. We have faced civil war, and even after signing the peace treaty, we have sequels of that time, and we still have illegal groups active in our country. So we know that there are circumstances and situations of violence that affect the way in which children learn, they go to school, and they relate to each other. As well as that, we right now have the second biggest migration phenomenon after Syria. We know that more than 500,000 of children enrolled in schools in Colombia are Venezuelan. And that also created higher demands for us to organize a curriculum and to be relevant to what they're living and what we can provide for them. We also need to understand that our country hosts a number of cultures, ethnic groups. We have Afro-Colombian groups. We count with indigenous populations as well as Gypsy Rum populations that affect or that influence our education system. The biggest challenge and complaint that we have heard is that the educative system has not been aware of the different contexts. Next slide. Why are we working? What are we doing here in Colombia? Can you? Thank you. So here in Colombia, we are working on several aspects that at a curriculum level. First, to articulate all aspects in the early childhood education, because currently we face the challenge that we can say that early childhood, middle, and secondary education are fragmented from each other. So we have been working hard so teachers understand and focus on children and they understand the educative process as a complete journey that goes from early childhood to middle education or upper secondary school in order to diminish dropout rates and also to avoid children being left behind or having to retake grades, because we know that given the assessment and evaluation system that we currently have, teachers are more focused on the test results and not so much on the development of skills of the children. So that's what we've been working on the first point when we promote complete educational journeys. Another aspect that has been subject of discussions around the country is the quality of education. And we need to understand that quality of education is not only what happens inside the classroom. Of course, that is important what the teacher is able to provide, but we need to provide a group of proposals that derive from the Ministry of Education, from the regional institutions, and the local institutions, given that we have a decentralized educational system. And that those policies and those concepts are reflected finally in each one of the classrooms. So we know that in this way we can carry out a bigger and more impactful curriculum transformation. And the third aspect is teacher training, on-site training. We have been developing training programs, ongoing training, different courses, webinars. We have provided different types of support for teachers and also have provided higher education, graduate education, so our teachers can have access to master's degrees, doctorate degrees, PhDs. And over the last 10 years, we have developed a strategy, Todos Aprender, Let's All Learn. And that strategy has been focused to identify what changes do we need to develop in the practice and the curriculum for each one of the teachers. Given that we don't have a standardized curriculum, it is very important that we give the priority to certain subjects. Here we focus on mathematics and languages, also on social emotional skills. So those are the three main aspects: mathematics, languages, and social emotional skills. And in these ways, we have learned how teachers can provide guidance, counseling, these teachers have been successful inside their own classrooms, and they have worked with their peers, with other teachers, in teaching them those techniques and innovations that have been successful with their own students. And then they can sit and discuss, share experiences, find out what are the best methodologies, and to exchange best practices and to work hand in hand as peers so they can create a real transformation. So those are the three strategies that our country has implemented over the last 10 years. A few months ago, we received a report of the World Bank that show us that we were able to bridge the gaps in rural areas. So we proved that it was very successful to focus on three main subjects and not 9 subjects as it was previously. Can we switch to the next slide, please? Thank you. When we do a follow-up and accompany teachers in developing and implementing methodologies that help the students learn through developing projects focused on languages, mathematics, and social-emotional skills, aimed at developing critical thinking within the students. So that is the work that we consider that should be a priority. So we are able to assess the improvements that we have carried out in our curriculum. We start working in early childhood education with topics such as exploration, art, literature, learning by playing as fundamentals on which children build their knowledge and how they are able to get to learn about different realities. And based on the early childhood experiences, we've been trying to transform the whole educational journey, because we know that in later grades, previously we had focused only in imparting knowledge, one directional flow of knowledge between teachers and students. But I truly believe that one of the greatest accomplishments here in Colombia has been to be able to transform early childhood processes. Next slide, please.
Aquí en la diapositiva lo que vemos es una manera como ¿Se está viendo la diapositiva?
Sí, puedes continuar.
Gracias. Lo que hemos estado diciendo básicamente se sintetiza.
There seems to be an issue with the translation, with
Puedes
interpretation.
continuar.
Ok, en la diapositiva lo que se muestra básicamente es como
Sorry, I feel like excuse me for jumping in, I'm really sorry. I think we've maybe lost one of the translators. Angela.
Yes, I'm here.
Sorry.
Roundtable.
Sorry.
So in the slide what we were showing is what we're explaining about the experience in the articulation between the different information cycles and how when we get to these matters of media education is regarding to the options that the students may have in the country to continue. They can access superior education. We implemented a superior education policy that allows the entire population to access the underprivileged population to freely access to superior education. They can have proper training process in order to continue with entrepreneurships in matters of work or in technical and technological education. Next slide. Here I want to focus mainly in what, based on the exercise and these formulations and initial premises, what we have been working on in the matter of closing the gaps in learning issues. So we now know, and we have discussed, which are the main situations generated by the pandemic in the child population. So without ignoring the way in which the curricular transformation had been performed in the country.
Excuse me?
It seems like we lost Constanza, or is that just me?
Would allow the teachers to have a diagnosis quick, that's made in a quick fashion, a diagnosis that allows each teacher to be able to understand what is the starting point in which their students are at when at the moment of returning physically to the schools. Nowadays, Colombia is returning 100% of its students, about 10 million students. They are returning to physically being at school. So we are receiving them with the application of that instrument. It's an instrument that's not standardized. It's a learning formation test where each one can, considering the grade of each children, either in internet or through paper and pencil for the population that does not have any access to internet. So the teacher can have a starting point. The second moment of the process is related to an exercise that's very important to handle, and that we believe sometimes we quickly work over it, but it's necessary to go to follow up on the teachers so they can understand, they can learn how to interpret the results of the evaluations of the children, so that they can understand the results of that evaluation process that was applied, and based on that, to be able to understand in the frame of their context and their conditions, in the rhythm and the learning style that they have, in order to progress to a third moment that's related to the design and of strengthening, academic strengthening plans and pedagogic strengthening plans. Now that is where each teacher has the follow-up through different strategies. All teachers are followed up so that they can design a plan that's innovative, so that it has elements that are coherent with the results of the evaluation that was made of the learning of the children, that has integrating elements, and that is based on methodologies that allow the integration of knowledge. For us today, that's one of the most important hypotheses in front of which we can progress in matters of quality education. We can manage for the teachers to generate different skills rather than managing the curriculum content, so that the contents of language, or additionally to the language and mathematical contents, they also can focus, so that they also focus in the development of social emotional skills, so that they understand that the emotional state of the children, the way they relate to learning, are determinant, they're instrumental, so the children can progress in their curricular process, so that the child can relate, the children can relate themselves to interact with knowledge, they can exchange knowledge with their mates, so that they find that what they're learning is good, is useful for them in the life, that they are solving real problems that is related to their real life and their daily life that involves their family. That's where the main essence of the strategy that we're trying to implement lies, and which would end in the condition of saying this is a continuum. It includes another element that for us is very important, and that is the development of capabilities in the sectors related to education. There are some policies issued by the Ministry of Education, but the ministry also needs to be demanding with the policies that orientate the population. There are the education secretaries, because education in Colombia is decentralized. So there are secretaries of education. Each department has its own secretary. There, the educational service is administered. There, they need to work to arrange the shifts of the teachers, the training of the teachers, the endowments that the education institutions receive. All that is related to be able to support those strategies, those pedagogic strategies that are integrated and innovative, that we are at this moment uh, trying to, and that teachers is proposing to develop. And we need to work a lot with the principals. There is strong evidence that shows that if pedagogic leadership skills in the principles of the institutional locations, that could have an impact, a very important impact on matters of transformation of the pedagogic practice, of the exercise, a different exercise of a different planning, which is more coherent with the context, that's open, that talks about global spaces, but also acknowledging the particularities, the cultural and linguistic and language particularities of the population. That exercise is the one that we are implementing at this moment. We are developing it, and we are performing this since last year. We started with this process in the territory, and this year we expect to implement it, fully implemented in the educational institution. This is where I will stop my presentation, basically, regarding Colombia. If there's any question, I've got the answer.
Corina, Constanza finished, and she said, if if there's some question, welcome. There are some questions.
Hola, Connie.
Hey,
Soy
Connie. Hello, Madam. How are you? Oh, I'm fine, thank you. When you were making your presentation, there was a moment where you froze. You were talking about an assessment tool that you're using in the schools. Could you please tell us a little bit more about how that evaluation strategy, and how that is joined to that holistic vision of the children as subjects of rights, as you were mentioning in the beginning? Yeah, sure. The test is made by the ICFES as an entity, as an organism that's the expert in the country regarding quality assessment. It's a short test that uses knowledge, the knowledge that they have of structuring objective tests, standardized tests, but this is not a standardized test. These are short notebooks, simple for areas that allow a teacher to identify or define which areas are the ones they want to evaluate, at what time of the year they'll do it, and under which methodologies, quantitative could be, uh, they develop it. So it's a different concept from the evaluation. They make learning circles. They also make teachers networks in order to work and on the results of the evaluation. Here, the principal enables the teachers to use the ICFES platform. They sign up and they can lead the children to use the application that could be made in platform or via paper and pencil, and the ICFES will read the results. The additional point, and in my opinion, the most important one in the advance of this exercise is the tools. There is a toolkit so that teachers can learn how to interpret the results of the evaluation, the entire assessment of the learning process, because what we saw is that there was a gap between the results of the assessment and the proposal from the teacher. Here we said we are going to use the results of the exercise of what each teacher found, and based on that, what's the coherence with the pedagogic process made by the teacher, considering the cycle the child is undergoing, if it's medium education, primary, basic, or if it's initial. That's basically it. Well, thank you very much.
Angela, I'm not sure, would you like me to read out the questions that are coming in through the chat bar? Angela, are you doing that? I see Anna.
Yes, thank you. I'm reading too. Yes, it's okay. Thank you.
So you'll put those over, give those over to Constanza.
Okay. En el chat nos dice Wesam.
So in the chat, Wesam Hasanach says that most of the countries, the idea is of what the students are feeling is getting more popular. It's very important to see what's being contributed to the students and which are the abilities and the skills that actually benefit their knowledge. So they're saying that how do we plan in Colombia? Are we planning in Colombia to do this shift in the focus centered in the knowledge of the teachers and applied to the development of capabilities? I understand that the question is related to how can we work with the teachers and to understand this change, the shift in the focus, so we can promote in students this development of skills that are competing for this time in history. I believe that although the formulations regarding these matters of social, economic, social, emotional development come from a long time ago, and they have been part of the thoughts on matters of education for the Colombian case, in the framework of the pandemic, there was a huge difference so that they could become a main relevant part of the planning in educational matters. Nowadays in the country, we have a great, there's more awareness and more acceptance by the teachers that it's very important to acknowledge the emotional conditions of the children. And we believe that this has happened because from the Ministry of Education, this has been part of the public agenda, of the political agenda, and all education debates that we have given We have talked about human development, about social emotional development, about giving priority. If the final goal of education is human development, what's most interesting for us in this moment is to be coherent in order to achieve that above, beyond the knowledge. The children has to be okay. The child has to be connected with the system. The child must find in the teacher a support and a company to any condition they may have. So we have made a lot of, or we have a lot of line source strategies of work. Some of them have been to create a site with a lot of tools, virtual tools, in order to work the matters of emotional development. We have also made a huge alliance with the Ministry of Health to work on the matters of public health. We have been able to reach more than 10,000 teachers by trading and on the matters of the development of social emotional development, but most importantly has been to be able to connect so that the social emotional development of the teachers is also instrumental to understand the children's development, to understand that a good pedagogic process is also related to a teacher that's calmed, that's confident, that has been able to manage his fears, his anguishes, that does not bear any anger against the sector or the institution itself, because the consequences of the pandemic have been so huge, so big, and in a country that has so many gaps in education, there's only resulted in more pain and more anger from the teachers themselves and more rage from them. And we have been working on that a lot. We have been needing to listen a lot, to talk a lot to them, acknowledge them, to follow up on them, to give them, to share materials with them, to understand why the predictions regarding the amount of knowledge required by the principles that the children must have will not be achieved. But what we need to do is to connect ourselves, to connect ourselves again with the educational system, and they have understand that it is genuine for the sector to be able to give a priority to the matter of the social emotional conditions. I believe that by it's in the ways we have worked, that they have seen that the sector have been flexibilized, and that's what we have been most interested in. We are not that interested on the way they're grading, or if the child is passing or not, or failing. We give support to the child so they can be calm, they can be confident, they can trust other classmates. So there is a speech and there's a logic of public policy that's more focused on that aspect. And that has allowed us to make ourselves more reliable to the teachers.
Is there another question? No, no hay más preguntas por ahora.
There's no other questions at the moment.
If you have any other questions, also feel free to just unmute yourself. So you don't necessarily have to use the chat function. We really want this to be as interactive and engaging as possible. So feel free to just jump in at any point and ask Constanza directly. With the help of translators, obviously, we're very grateful for that. So yes, please come in if you have any other questions.
Corina, y mientras nos hacen otra
Corina, while another question is made, if there's another one, I also want because it may be interesting for the participants, and we've been working on this through this space and other events, is to show how the pandemic did generate had a greater effect on the population of the smaller kids. For the Colombian case, the most largest number of children that were excluded from the educational system were preschool. And surely on that matter, there's an exercise that forces us to review jointly ways and mechanisms that allow us to think. And I would like a lot for this space for us to exchange ideas regarding how can we enhance and strengthen the work in matters of initial education. What we did was to focus the government efforts to follow up in Colombia. There's 19,600 teachers in preschool. We have been contacting them all. We are going to give them training to all the teachers, the preschool teachers. We've made a very important exercise to be directly at the educational institutions with them, to be able to support and to improve the ways in which the educational service is being provided. But we acknowledge that that's the moment when there's going to be the most negative impact. I mean, the impact on the educational system is quite big, is quite negative, but the most effective focus, which is the base for all the educational process and for the experience that we are discussing here, is centered in the issues of the youngest ones, the smallest ones, the initial education, which is how we call it here in Colombia. That's an issue that we need to think about worldwide and that we need to review between all of us, because it's very complex and it's urgent that we need to handle.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Constanza. And I mean, maybe, obviously this is not only a session to ask questions or direct questions at Constanza, but as she was saying, this is a collective effort, and this is an issue that needs to be addressed holistically and worldwide. So I don't know, but maybe anyone else who would like to share their perspective on particularly early years education, but also what they may have been doing in their countries. I'm not sure. I see that we do have, at least from the names that I'm seeing, it seems like we do have quite a diverse audience. So maybe if anyone else would like to come in and share their experience with early years education in their country and how a breadth of skills approach is implemented in their respective region. We'd love to hear from you. Feel free to also just jump in and not raise your hand, but obviously, or write in the chat as you like.
Perdón, Rafael, no sé si quieras compartir.
Excuse me, Rafael, I don't know if you want to share something of what we were discussing in the table about the closing of gaps, which I believe that's related to this matter that Constanza was mentioning.
Yes, of course. In my country, early childhood education has been a very important issue for the last 12 years. Now, early childhood education is compulsory in my country. So we have a lot of work, and the goal is tremendous to give this early childhood education to all the population from 0 to 5 years old. I think it's the only country in Latin America that has this compulsory education for these first years of life. So during this pandemic situation, we have faced a lot of problems, and basically the issue has been made by giving some guidelines to parents, since it's very difficult to approach technology to this group of people. So the reform has been made in the reform was made 3 years ago. So we just have training for teachers 9 months, and then we face this sanitary situation. So I think we have a lot of work to do, having in our minds, at least in my country, that technology is not the solution for this group of people, and that we have to work a lot with parents, not only with mothers, but with parents in general. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rafael. Would anyone like Would
So
anyone else like?
congratulations to Constanza, because I know very well the Cero a Siempre, which is the public policy that has been made in Colombia for a lot of time, and it's a real important policy decision that Colombia has made, and that it's in the present because it has made it has changed a lot of minds and a lot, and has put the center in early childhood in the region. Congratulations, Constanza.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Back in el
I would
chat.
like to say to Constanza that in the chat, Syrian from Palestine is saying that in his country, the initial education between 1 and 5 years is not mandatory, and that they have the care and education mission is relied upon the family, and that prevents the children from learning at early stages to participate in the process of development of skills. I think that's the situation that we still have in some countries, right? Regarding the attention to boys and girls in their initial education. Thank you for the contribution.
Connie, a mí me da mucha curiosidad, ¿por qué crees
I'm
que
quite curious, why do you believe that the dropout rate is larger at these ages? Is it because the parents fear more that the children will return because they have no vaccination, or because they consider that the early age education is not important? Does the ministry have any notion why do the families are deciding not to send the smallest children to school? Clearly, the economic condition has placed an instrumental role in the analysis that we did. The loss of the employment in women double folded. About 1 million jobs were lost for men, and for women, it was more than 1.5 million. So that results in a huge affectation, and that's related to the actions of care and with the economic matters, and that has significant influence in the prioritization. The family had to determine whether to pay lease, to pay for the education of an older child that they believe is more important, instead of a kindergarten that can wait according to them. But also the access of the smaller child implies more cooperation actions, who takes him, who will transport him, who will take care of him, and that makes the actions more complex. So the affectation, the official sector was sensitively affected in their enrollment, and we're trying to recover that now. But clearly in the private sector, there was a huge loss of the offer itself. A lot of kindergarten had to close because there were no possibilities. The government tried to support in the enrollment matters, but after practically 2 years, the children were outside the small children were outside the educational institutions. Yes, of course. A lot of institutions were closed for the smallest ones, and they weren't able to reopen. Yes, because, and that will take a lot of time to recover that. And the official enrollment fee increased. The official enrollment increased, but there was no impact during the first years. For the first year, so we have to make a lot of hard work in order to recover that enrollment rate. We have a lot of children that are being attended between the social sector and the educational sector, because in Colombia, the initial education is not mandatory, and we have a large group of children that we have not managed to make them return to the system. So there's very strong tasks in matters of focalization, active search, and other strategies will be required in order to recover this population. And obviously the affectations, maybe in a month, we will see the results of the first exercise that you helped to implement on measuring quality in the initial education. We already made that with a representative sample of the entire country, and we will have the results, but The preliminary results show that there is a delay and a strong effect on the first early childhood population in the pandemic regarding the areas and their moments and their areas of development. So thinking in the priorities of conversation in this workspace, I believe that the call made by the Vice Minister is instrumental, and it attains us all to think of work options. In the table we were discussing, and with Rafael in the closing of gaps, we were discussing in the group, where could we start? Because there is a long list of situations that have been worsened with the situation of the pandemic, but indeed thinking about this process of generating the appropriation of a focus centered in the development of skills, and considering that the first childhood has the situation of disconnection, if you will, and the families, because in tables we have discussed also the role and situation of the families and the need of follow-up to develop skills that allow them to enriching their interactions with the children. I believe that's important that we continue this discussion topic, because we have questions, we have similar situations, but we do not have answers, and we still have the concern of how do we start, what approach will we follow, what's the order to work in this aspect. So I'd like to insist on this call by the Vice Minister. She is saying that indeed there has been an affectation in this populational group, and this is where all this experience starts. So we need to consider the thoughts on this topic.